the great question is, if you had $10 million handed to you now, what would you do? For me, money is just a resource we use to build a wonderful life. And, I think that's actually a bit of an issue we have with the way people view finances, is our personal finances have very little to do with maths, in my opinion. It's down to what you do with the money you get. It's not down to the money you get. The salary is not the magic. The magic is what you do with the cash flow.
Welcome everyone to the 6th episode of the Upworth Talks, the podcast for the modern empowered individuals, where we sit with inspiring characters and leaders in the field to deep dive into the world of personal finance and money management in Australia and beyond. Today I'm really excited to welcome a legendary guest of Hollywoodian dimensions. If Tom Cruise has long been associated with Mission Impossible, Peita Diamantidis' personal legend is tied to Mission Possible, a book to empower everyone to become a finance action hero.
Absolutely.
A self-described geek of math and finance, a guru of the psychology of money, Peita has been a judge of the Australian Business Book Awards, a host of the Advice Tech podcast, and has been recognized as one of the most influential financial advisors in the country. In short, Peita brings the best of the right and left brain together to help people manage their money better as managing director and financial advisor at Caboodle Financial Services. Diamantidis, I did my research, comes from diamond-like in Greek. So not only it is good news for your longevity, because we know that diamonds are forever, but also it was your fate to help people build long-lasting wealth.
It's absolutely true. And in fact, it was a great sign when I married a good Greek boy and his name was Diamond. I felt that was good news.
On top.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Right?
Yeah.
Only good news.
Yeah. Bringing the best of both worlds.
Exactly.
So, I am Maxime Chory, co-founder of Upworth, and really honored to welcome you today, Peita.
Thank you for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I ask you to fasten your seatbelt because we are going to venture with Peita in Caboodle land. We are going to explore what it takes to become a financial action hero, how to overcome the key pitfalls and difficulties people face in their financial journey, and hopefully emerge from it victorious and smarter.
Absolutely.
But before we start, a key disclaimer. As we have seen, we are a fun bunch, so we are here for entertainment and information, and not to give financial advice. That said, if you want to get financial advice, Peita has all the certificates, expertise, and experience needed, so you can actually get it from her, but that will be outside of this podcast. But here we are. Peita, thanks again for coming.
No, thank you for having me.
To this Upworth Talk. And, obviously we are ready to start, but before we deep dive into the subject of the day, maybe I think our listeners want to know the hero that we are meeting today. So what is your hero's journey, Peita? How did you end up building this wonder of the financial world that is Caboodle? Tell us more about you.
Oh, more about me. Wow, where to start? I actually started in investment banking, would you believe?
Yeah.
So, and we can bleep this out if you like, but I used to call it investment wanking. And that's because it was an environment of a whole lot of money, but not a whole lot of heart. And so while I learned so much in my years working in investment banking and getting thrown in the deep end on billion-dollar deals, it just had no meaning, and I realized that my boss at the time actually said to me, Peter, I'm not sure you're cut out for this. And at the time, you can imagine young 20-something me got quite upset about that, but he was really right. I actually wasn't cut out for it because I wanted to connect with people and money to me wasn't the point. And so that's when I started to look at how could I take all this learning, my actuarial studies background, my sort of degree and all the experience in M&A and corporate finance and apply it to individuals. And so that's when I started to study to become a financial advisor. So really only the number of zeros changed. It's all the same, right? It's all cash flow. It's your balance sheet. It's all the same stuff. It's just that the deals I used to do were $2.3 billion financing deals of railways and things globally. And now it's, it's families and their future. But it's very much the same.
But you have more powerful relationship and you see the impact at the local level.
You really do. And you take that, for me, I take that far more personally. In the deals we used to do in corporate finance, one of them was a privatisation of an Australian railway. Now, when businesses are privatised, invariably, lots of people get fired. And that's what a private company does, is make it more efficient, and lots of people lose their jobs. And we'd be having meetings, and they're talking about firing 600 people. And it was just a number for the people in that room. And to me, it's more than that. these are people's lives, and so that's what that difference became quite tangible and all really upsetting to me because I took that on. Sort of went, wow, this decision we're making this. I was only an analyst, right? I was the lowliest person in every room I was in corporate finance. I was very young.
Probably still the most energetic, but
well, you're not encouraged to have a lot of personality in that environment, so that could be part of it as well, right? So
no purple hair.
No purple hair, definitely. I mean, I remember thinking back then you wouldn't even. So I'm a Star Wars geek.
Yeah.
I love movies. I love fantasy books, but you wouldn't have shared any of that back then. You wore your suit to work. You did your work. You might have partied hard, but you didn't share all of that sort of, personality of yourself or nuance. Whereas now, I'm all about that because that's how people can connect with you. So it's the storytelling thing really started to come out, and I realized that you can really convince and engage people through storytelling, and it's so powerful. It's how wars have been started, is orators and the way they tell stories. Like these things have momentum and energy, and so part of the move out of corporate finance was that need to connect, engage, use storytelling, that sort of stuff. I was doing that with some of my the clients because that railway deal, the guys that I was dealing with for our clients were railway engineers. Some of them were train drivers, and had worked their way up to become COO of the business. I had to use storytelling to explain the complex financial deals we were doing for them. They were those sort of, those big whiteboards of 47 boxes and arrows and all the tax and, different jurisdictions, all that sort of stuff. And I had to use that to sort of get these guys across the line. So I was sort of flexing that muscle, but nowhere near as much as I can now, which is just more enjoyable for me too.
So that's the initial insight that led to the creation of Caboodle. So unfortunately, in the corporate world, there are some, massive layoffs that happen or that. So how do you as an individual get, your finances in order so that whether it happens or not, you actually know what to do, you are prepared, and you've planned your finances properly?
Yeah, and it's really interesting, actually, that process and witnessing that. In fact, the business, so I was with, and my last job in corporate finance was with Bankers Trust. Trust is a name we all know. We got taken over, so the corporate finance department got taken over by Deutsche Bank and Macquarie Bank at the time, right? And so I myself was experiencing this very thing that we just done all these people historically in the last few years. And what became clear is the people that coped with that well were resilient financially. So they had flex in their finances. They had enough sort of backup that they could make decisions slowly. They could look at what opportunities. So it started, even though at the time I'm sure I wasn't absorbing that, it was all a bit traumatic and change and all that sort of thing. Now, that's one of the things we established for people is a resilience fund. And this is just something that sits there so that then should something untoward happen, you've got that money. You can take your time, you can make a decision, you can look for the best opportunity in the future, and you don't rush just to get anything or panic. So those things actually, now that I think back, really taught me a lot about the way to shore up your finances so that it's not a big deal.
Yeah, a lot of bad decisions taken in the heat of an action. When you can take a little more time to reflect, then you avoid the most pitfalls, I guess.
Every time, like any friend who started a new job and had to choose one quickly, so they either got laid off or something happens, so they have to choose a new job and they do it really quickly, invariably that's the worst job they've ever taken. Because they ignore all the flags, they just are so worried about having a job, they pick any job. Whereas if you've got 6 months or more of money sitting there so that you can take your time, well then, you do your digging, you ask for more interviews, you do your research, you don't leap, you don't sign a contract the minute they lay it in front of you.
So you already started, even though, we started your story in Caboodle, but because you're so passionate about helping people, you're already in the heart of the subject.
Yeah.
But so on that, maybe, where should people start? Like, where does this journey of taking control of your finance start?
Yeah. So it's interesting. If you'd asked me this when I first started in advice, then, my answer, like anybody in finance, would be about your superannuation insurance and getting all that money stuff sorted. What I'd say now is the problem with that is it's dull. But to be frank, finance is not the most exciting thing and it's not particularly motivating, right? It's one of those things that you feel like you should do. Those, I should get my car maintenance, that annual maintenance thing on the car done. And I should do a checkup with the doc and like all those things that are shoulds, right? And the problem with the shoulds is we procrastinate about them. and they just get bumped down the list all the time, And so one of the problems then is when finance is just a should, it never gets done. So for me, the first thing people need to do is really carefully think about, what do they want? Like, what do you want out of life? Where do you want to be going? Do you want to go and live overseas for 6 months of the year and here for 6 months? Do you want to start a new business? Do you want to, what are the things you really want? And lean into understanding that, and then work backwards. Go, well, what does that mean? What do I need to do with my finances? Because that's far more motivating, right? Now, so for some people, it'll be, Peter, I want to go, and I've had clients, we want to go on a $20,000 trip every year. Awesome. Even better if they've got a list of the first 30. This is the order, the priority of the holidays that we want to have. We know exactly what we're going to do, and we've picked the itinerary, So really painting that picture of the future, then you've got that in your head, and then all the changes or the behaviours or the things I'm going to ask them to do that are changing their finance in the day-to-day are so easy because you've got that picture. You can see it in your mind's eye. You know why you're doing it. Whereas if you just say to something, you know what, you should put 20% of your salary away, they're like, why? But there's no reason to. It's
because it's immediate gratification versus versus immediate gratification versus something that's really exciting and I can relate to personally, right?
Correct. And look, property's an interesting. Actually, we did mortgage broking for some years, and people buying property taught me this because. Now it's much harder to do now, but years back you could have people that hadn't done tax returns for 6 years, right? And it just builds up all this stuff that they haven't done, right, financially. But if they want to buy a property and they know to get the mortgage they need to get all of those sorted, those tax returns get done pretty quickly. So that goal, that thing that they want, whether it's the first home or it's the upgraded home, whatever it is, instantly means that those tasks get bumped to the top of the list and they knock them off. Nothing's too hard. Of course, we can get together 47 documents that are going to required for those tax returns. So I think we've got to set the vision first. And for some people, that's really hard. They've never looked at their life that way. But now, like lots of people, if I said to them, the great question is, if you had $10 million handed to you now, what would you do? There is a good portion of the population that would be stupefied into silence if you said that to them.
And they will start by buying an Upworth hat, maybe.
Exactly. First purchase. But they wouldn't know what to do with it. And their next question would be, I don't know, what would they do with it? And they might start looking at what other people are spending on, and they'd spend on that. They've not bothered to really go, what do they love? What do they want life to look like?
That's why I think that it's very interesting, because that's why you've told me, right, you're like looking at psychology and personality when it comes to money, and that will be a way to help these people to figure out, what they want, and also what's the best way to plan it and make it happen.
Yeah.
So how do you, at Caboodle and in the way you help your clients, how do you leverage that?
Yeah, so one of the things we've got to do is we've got to actually unpack some stuff they've learned. So if you think about anything you've recently watched on TV, and there'll have been some banking ads or some insurance ads during that time, then all of them focus on a couple of key milestones: having kids, buying a house, retiring. That's really the only three things I think we're allowed to do in life. I'll get married, maybe there's a wedding one in there, maybe.
As long as you still have kids after.
Exactly, as long as you thought it's okay. But we're sort of taught subliminally with advertising that those are the things that life should contain, and this is the order, and this is how it works. For most people, that's not going to be how it works, right? For huge amounts of young Australians now, they're going to have investment properties. They're not going to have homes they own necessarily. That's not a problem. It's just different. I mean, if anybody who's been to London, all my mates in London, none of them own their home. Right? But they do have property elsewhere. So I think we've got to unpack that conditioning a bit, because because they don't have their own goals, their own vision. They've just taken on what advertising has subliminally given them. Or mum and dad, or, well-intended aunts and uncles say, you really should do this, right? So we've got to unpack that. So part of that is getting them to build that curiosity muscle, getting them to just collect all those dreams and hopes and write them down, start to work with those. So we've sort of got to teach them that. So that's one of the first things we've got to do. And I know that sounds funny, like I'm, actuarial studies trained financial advisor, and I'm talking about...
You're kind of like the Australian Tony Robbins.
I don't think I've got the teeth for it, actually. I'm not tall enough, but sure. But certainly inspiring them to believe they can is a really important part of that. So that's one of the first things we've got to do, right? And then what's interesting is helping them start to narrow that down and quantify what that means. So what would it mean if we did, you worked in Sydney for 6 months and then you lived in Paris for 6 months every year? Like what quantify what that means. What would that take? And what's interesting is invariably when we do that for people, there isn't a significant change to the way what they're spending to make that possible. So it's not like they've got to completely transform their world. They've just got to apply some focus. So but the first thing is that we paint the picture, then we quantify that. And invariably, as we do that, I have a version 2 every time I have one of those meetings. I say, we're going to set a second meeting that's a replicate of this. Because once they see what's possible, all sorts of other ideas come out. Well, does that mean I could start a bakery in Melbourne? Does that mean, like, all of some of these things that they've restrained or held back within themselves come out and they want to discover whether that's possible too. So we do that sort of quantification for them. And once they've painted that picture, then we talk about, all right, so what does that mean right now? What do we need to do to help you set you up right now? And a whole lot of that, to be honest, is automation. So it's setting up their cash flows so it just, the right amount goes into the right account and they're just sorted. They know how much they can spend on holiday. And I don't mean...
That's where Upworth comes in the picture.
Exactly, right? Exactly. So, look, and I can only operate from my perspective, and I don't know about you, but I'm not a fan of budgets, right? I mean, I love spreadsheets. I'm a geek, right? So I love a good spreadsheet. But the whole concept of everything getting entered in and collating and tallying and for what you're spending, it just doesn't.
You want the output, you don't want the process.
Correct. I'm not interested. It's like exactly like cleaning. I love a clean house. I'm not interested in the process. Right? Not at all. Right?
Okay.
So
that's the whole value of automation. Yeah.
Right, exactly. So the automation for us is working out what are the fixed expenses they've got over a year. And all of that just comes out of one account. So we work out how much of their salary needs to go in there, and they're just sorted. From that point forward, they never need to think about them again, aside from maybe competitive pricing on things, making sure they're not paying too much, but that just gets sorted. Then they have an account that's about their day-to-day grocery and all that sort of stuff. And then they also have, well, we've got a different name for it, but a fun account. So that's, going out, that might be Uber Eats, all those sort of things. They know how much. So every week they're going to know what they can spend that on. The main one that I love is the adventure fund. So that's a certain amount of every pay going in for these adventures in the future. So that could be cherry blossoms in Japan. It could be, so literally yesterday I flew in from New Zealand. So that was a motorhome around the South Island of New Zealand. We used our adventure fund for that. So all of those monies just get allocated to those things, and the last amount goes to your financial mission. So whether that be paying down the debt on your mortgage, it could be setting up an investment account. So it's all just automated. So you don't have to second guess any of it. It's just going to happen. You might, once a year you'll sit down and go, well, what am I going to, I've saved that amount this year. What financial mission will I apply it to? But that's as hard as it gets. You don't worry whether you've got enough for a bill. And the other thing the reason we do that is most people actually don't know so if there was an item that came up, it could be an expensive handbag, it could be a wonderful new laptop because you like to go gaming, whatever it is, most people actually can't tell you whether they can actually afford it. Like that's not a concept that most people can work out. Do you know what I mean? So they might go, well, I feel like that isn't in my price range. So they might be able to tell you, well, that $20,000 bag, definitely that's not in my price range. So they might be able to go that far, but I can't actually tell you whether right now I can afford to buy that $5,000 laptop.
And so this collects around BNPL and
right. So they just can't. So they can't get the. Whereas if they've got the automation set up, well, they know what the balance is now for the venture fund or for the fund. They know what it's going to be in 6 months, and if it takes any more than that, they can't afford it. So it just simplifies all of that for people, and it's quite liberating because it gives them a way to say no too.
They have clear frame of reference.
They really do. And if there is something bigger that they want to do, well, that becomes part of potentially that financial mission. Maybe it is a bigger thing. Maybe it's a new house or an upgrade or a renovation or whatever it might be.
So it helps people separating different levels of objectives and the relative importance. Maybe buying a bag is not your number one goal in life.
Correct.
And so consequently, maybe if you have a bigger amount to spend, it will be on your house, maybe rather than the bag.
But also what I like about it too is it's conscious spending. Most of the disasters we see as advisors are unconscious spending. I mean, I've seen people that spend more on Uber Eats than they do on an annual holiday. Now, when you think about what that is, don't get me wrong, I have Uber Eats on my phone. I mean, we use it, right? But it's a tool for convenience, right? So we don't have to drive up to Char Grill's Charlie Chicken, pick up the chicken and take it home, right? But what we don't realize is often we have so many things for convenience these days. What are we doing with all that time we think we're saving? Like, do you know what I mean? Like, what?
Yeah.
I know that was convenient, but did you meditate? Did you spend time with your partner? Did you go for a walk? No. We just do more and more things that are convenient, but we don't ever take advantage of the time. It's this strange thing, right? We're just so used to, I just made life easy. Yeah, okay, but did it? So it's really looking at what
you don't find meaning in just easiness or comfort. You
Correct.
need to have higher goals.
Correct. And what if just wandering up, walking up and getting yourself on, or cooking at home yourself, it's a lost art, entertaining at home. Dinner parties. Dinner parties were a huge thing in my parents' lives and that generation. It's a lost art now. Most people wouldn't even know how to have a dinner party, right? But the cost, right? But the cost, the difference in cost for an individual could be 1/5 of going out with your mates, even if you have them all over your house. So all of these decisions become easier when you've got that sort of structure in place and you've got a goal you're working towards, something really cool that's happening. What would you prefer to do? Do a massive tour, going back to my Japan say, that you might never have been. I'm going with 8 of my schoolmates. We're all getting together. It's been years. We haven't seen each other. We're all going to go, and that just means that I don't have takeout for a few months. Like that decision becomes much easier than an advisor just saying you're spending too much on Uber Eats without that secondary, like without that vision. That's the trade-off, right? That's the difference.
So like the first piece is really the vision and how that makes all the difference. But down the line, do you still see some, like, once the vision is set and then you're pretty compelling in your persuasion around that, so I'm sure it works pretty well. But like, do you still see like some pitfalls and some things that after the vision is set on the planning or implementation? What are the key mistakes that people make or difficulties that people face?
Yeah,
to help them to basically overcome, I guess.
Yeah, and it's interesting. So, and one of them really isn't financial at all, but it's indecision. So I call them decision mazes. When you're caught and you think you've got the decision, and then there's another piece of information. Oh crap! Does that mean I turn this way or I turn that way? And they just overwhelm and they just spiral and they never get out of the maze. So lots of people just never manage to make big decisions. So they'd love to move to Hong Kong and work there. They just can't get their head around how we would make that decision, So actually a lot of where I end up having to help is that sort of coaching, is breaking down these decisions into critical paths. Well, what's the first thing we really need to work out? And then what's the second thing? And then what's the third thing?
Like investment banking due diligence.
Right, all of that. So it's so interesting because critical thinking, like that, so hundreds of years ago, that was what was considered university-level education, was debate and critical thinking. Now, almost no degree teaches that at all. Yeah. Like, there's very few, right? And critical thinking is what can get us through difficult decisions. And so there's a lot of that I end up having to help people with because it's overwhelming. Like, there's so many things, and we've got so many choices, don't we? I mean, just go to the shops, like... Every time I go to the grocery, I'm like, oh God, this is exhausting. We don't go grocery shopping anymore. We get it delivered because I just can't deal with all the decisions. So there's too many choices, right? So I think for people being able to lay that out for them so that they know the next best thing they've got to work out is this. I'm not worried about the big picture. It's just this. We've got to work that out. So that's what, helps a lot of people. It's what really brings them up short, I think. And I see that with people who save well, interestingly. So I've got a number of clients who
say well, but they don't know what to do.
They don't do it correct, and so they hesitate and they worry about spending it because it's been so hard to save, and so that they keep on hesitating. And we're talking years of hesitation, right? And I mean, there's some clients that I meet with each year where I am nagging them to spend money. Every meeting, and one of them actually is a lovely client who's a retiree, and I'm trying to get her to renovate her bathroom or kitchen or the whole unit. Like, I'm like, would you please spend some money? But because, and we've worked together and she's getting much better, but it's sort of unpacking frugality is another thing I actually have had to do more of than I thought I would, is when people are good at squirreling away. So there's one side where you're teaching them to squirrel away, right? And the automation and everything really helps. The other side is unpacking frugality, giving them the license and the freedom to spend. And that's part of what those different accounts are for, is I'm saying to them, that fund account better be empty by your next paycheck. Like, this is not something that builds up, man. If it's built up, you go out and go silly. Like, please, that's what it's there for.
Different personality types have different strengths.
100%. So different.
Difficulty to spend, some difficulty to save.
So different. So, and people will be like, really? Because in our own world, we think everybody's like us, whatever our type is. But honestly, there are some people
Thankfully not. It's much more diverse.
Isn't it? It is much more diverse. But yeah, there's a lot of, it'll be one of those two things, particularly. And so really helping people, giving them the license and the confidence to say, well, yes, we can go. I mean, I don't go to the Easter show and get the kids 5 bags each, because I know we've built up the fun account. We can spend that on that, whereas they might have, I don't know if we can put that sort of thing. So that's one of the things. I guess the only other thing I'd say is, one of the challenges I see for people, and it's all because of the finance industry, is they probably focus on the wrong things. So I'll see people in their 30s or 40s or 50s, and they'll come to us and they'll say, Peter, and they'll be coming saying, we want you to look at our super fund and see if it's the best super fund. I'm like, oh, good. And then I look at their situation and they're spending everything they're earning. There's no saving going up. Like, there's all sorts of stuff going on in their finances.
And they focus on the wrong
And they're focused, correct. And in Australia, what's interesting is, I mean, I would argue your super could almost be one of the last things you look at. And the reason I say that is other countries in the world don't have super guarantee arrangements like we have. Our employers have to put money into a super account here. It's part of law. So we're already a step ahead. We've already all got a retirement fund. That doesn't exist elsewhere in the world, in many places. So we're already a step ahead. So if we've already got that, why wouldn't we focus on other areas? Let's worry about our day-to-day cash flow, because that's something we can have an immediate impact on, And then, yes, absolutely, let's make sure you're not spending too much in the super, like it's not, the fees aren't too high. Absolutely, like all of that is worth doing. It's on the margin, though. Lives that change, honestly, in my belief, in cash flow. If they can change their cash flow, they can do almost anything they want to do. Whereas the super, it's on the margin, So that's the mistake I often see, is they'll spend all this energy, comparing, and yet they're blowing every dollar they earn, just goes out and they have no idea where it's going. So it's a different place to focus. And to be frank, it's not as sexy. I get it, right? It's not about investing returns, but none of the other stuff is possible. If you can't have dollars left over at the end of every paycheck, then I don't need to teach you how to invest. You're not going to have money to invest. I don't need to help you get a property. You're not going to have money to buy a property. So actually power is in the cash flow.
Yeah, I mean, like, basically having a mindset sometimes of the fear of losing some what you already have, like the super, versus also trying to have the courage to build something and to
And look, it is hard. Look, there's so many ways we can spend money now. Like, it's ludicrous. I mean, subscriptions and memberships, and like, it's just, our life is full of things that we pay for. So this is not me as judgment at all. I completely get it. But I have seen people on an 80K salary who are in better shape than people on a 300K salary with a bonus of about the same every year. Now, what that tells me is it's down to what you do with the money you get. It's not down to the money you get. The salary is not the magic. The magic is what you do with the cash flow. And those people work so hard. Like, you look at somebody who's on that sort of high income, they're probably working 90, 100 hours a week, probably don't see their family, like all sorts of choices they're making to try and do the right thing, or like, really add value, build wealth. But actually, they end up with nothing at the end of it.
And they have even less time, so then they're taking on their personal finance.
Exactly. Like, it's this vicious spiral, So to me, that cash flow stuff is so important.
And consequently, Caboodle and yourself are so important, because you are what enable these people to basically change their lifestyle in a way that will actually, they will be able to leverage their high income into actually high saving, high investment, and financial independence.
Correct. But do it because of the awesome life they're going to build. And I think, like, there are people, and it is down to, look, for the listener, it is down to your type. I mean, finding an advisor or any other type of financial advisor, any other type of advisor for anything, this is a dating game, right? You've got to find somebody that gels with you. It's really important, right? So some people are listening to me going, Peter, what on earth are you talking about? I just want to be wealthy. Like, I just want to build a hell of a lot of money. Well, awesome. Go and find a person that's what their focus is, and there will be advisors or coaches or people out there that focus on that. That's just not my game. For me, money is just a resource we use to build a wonderful life. So that's how I'm going to deliver any of the coaching or any of the advice I give.
It's financial advice plus wisdom.
Well, I hope so. I've always wanted to be Yoda.
So,
no, that's not true.
Half guru and half financial guru, half life guru, basically.
Yeah. Well, look, I just think money isn't the point. It's not.
So, where did you learn that? Did you learn that in one of good sci-fi or fantasy books? What are your inspirations here?
Yeah, you know what? I wish it was. I wish I had a great story of where that comes from. It comes from that investment banking days. I saw people. So during that time, I worked.
So rich and so unhappy, and then you had
like people earning serious money with serious bonuses, but we were working 120-hour weeks. There were days I didn't go home. So I'd work 40 hours, 48 hours straight, that sort of stuff, and get good income, but had nothing to show for it. It's like, okay, well, hold on. And you'd look at the ones that, like I was in my early 20s, right? But you'd look at the ones later, and I mean, they looked old to me, but they were younger than I am now, right? But they were in their 40s, and they look 60 for starters, and they're not happy. Most of them are on their third or fourth partner, or marriage, and they're miserable, and they never see their kids. I'm like, wait a minute, okay, hold on. Exactly. Wait a minute, I'm missing something. I don't want to be this. What's wrong there? And so that really, I'm so lucky that I actually worked there, because I got a whole lot of business experience really quickly, which I really am grateful for. At the time, I had a boss that just threw you in the deep end. I mean, I was sitting there,
how it works,
right, and sitting negotiating with government department. Like it's ludicrous how young I was and what we were doing, but that's just how they did it, right? So all of that was great, but the key thing it really showed me is what real well-being, financial well-being looks like. And it's not what I think people think it is. It isn't the big salary. Yeah, so it isn't the big salary. It isn't all the things, right? For me, financial well-being is confidence that you've got more than enough to do the things you want to do. Now, for some people, what they want to do means they only need a certain amount put aside. So for them, they're really happy on a certain income with an amount of savings, and they're ecstatic. They're just, this is amazing. For others, they might want the luxury yacht or whatever that is. None of that is a problem. It's just deciding what it is and working out, do I have more than enough to have that life? And then you're happy. That's literally what financial well-being is it's about happiness with the situation I'm in and the future that I'm building towards. And it may not have anything to do with salary. And I know that sounds bizarre, but
I mean, it's also being in Australia, in a country with relatively, high salary, social security.
Exactly. It is different. That's you're absolutely right. There's a point to be made there. People on very low incomes, it's about being able to afford food and a place to live. Absolutely. But once you get beyond that level, then it truly is about building that life and having enough to do that. And that word enough is really important. And that's why...
When is enough, yeah.
Right. And that's why a lot of what we end up doing as part of our coaching work we do is quantifying all those possibilities for people, really coming up with, well, what would it mean in the future? So, in Upworth, you've got that sort of net worth figure, you can track that. Well, what do you need to hit to then have that life? So that then you don't need to go beyond that. If you've reached that, well, sure. I mean, if you get an upside or something happens, you get a whole lot of money, that's great. But that's as far as you need to go, and once people see that, they're just gobsmacked. The number of people that we do that modeling for that then decide within 18 months to go on a 6-month sabbatical because they've realized actually they can, and their first choice is take time off, how interesting is that, right? Right? It's not buying things. It's take time off, spend time with people they love, have some wonderful experience.
So that's also here where your math and experience kicks in and add value, because what you're saying essentially is most people are not able to, project the numbers properly, and they have a very an accurate vision of what it means, especially on the medium term, I guess, the compounding and
definitely.
And this, what is usually what people are missing in there? Is it the compounding? Is it they are underestimated the effect of time, or?
Oh, we all do. we've all said it, right? We all, whether it's
biased.
just taking an extra step a day or taking the stairs, and so we all underestimate the small things we can do now that can have a big effect, right? And that's true with numbers and even with projections. I can say to people, what if we tweak? So, we do percentages of each pay that go into these accounts I was talking about. If we tweak that percent, that will mean that's a holiday every year instead of a holiday week, right? So, oh, really? So that sort of analysis, and I get why most people don't think that way. Like, I mean, maths is almost like a language to me. So, and I think that's actually a bit of an issue we have with the way people view finances. Is our personal finances have very little to do with maths, in my opinion. They have to do with behaviours. It's habits, it's behaviours, it's decisions.
But in the same
very little to do with maths, right? So for day to day. Then you hire a geek like me who literally thinks in numbers to do some number crunching for you, sure, right? And look at those possibilities and show you which ones are real. But you don't need to be on top of, you don't need to be a maths geek to do this stuff. And I think it's what holds a lot of people back with finances. I know it does for women. Is, I was no good at maths at school. Well, you don't need to be.
That's also the value of having like automation and technology. Because that's where you already directly see the output versus having to do the computation yourself, right? So having an idea of your performance without having to yourself do the calculation.
Right. It's not innate to most people, and neither should it be. I mean, there's sort of numbers that I'm comfortable with and the things I'm doing. Like that's, I mean, so we met, so for the listeners, so we met just earlier, right, in the forum, and we'd only spoken virtually before, and so you're about 400 feet tall, right? So now that's approximately 400 feet tall. That's not something that, that's just how you're born, right? You're a tall person. I view that with maths. Like I was born with just this thing. Right, that's a maths thing. It's not something everybody has. We're all quite different, and I don't think it's something we shouldn't all feel we have.
Whether you have the force or you don't, your dad has it, and some other
right. So I think I think this thing that just don't have the maths to do it. I would say to people, you don't need it. You don't need to feel good at maths. If you know that 10 is bigger than 5, you know enough maths for your personal finances, then hire somebody to do some of that modeling.
But isn't it like also an excuse just basically like, like when you procrastinate and you're lazy and you don't really know what to do, you use the fact that you're not good enough in math as an excuse for not doing it, whereas maybe it's actually some underlying reason that,
what I think... so it could be an excuse, but I also think that there's, and I know this is going to sound strange, but I think there's trauma around maths for lots of people. I think, so a maths class for me, I sat in that class and went, oh, finally somebody that speaks my language. Like for me, those numbers on that wall just made it. It's
beautiful. It's like a nice painting.
So, and conversely, I struggle to learn a second language. My brain does not work that way. It just does not.
It's
right?
not logical enough.
Incorrect. There's not a formula you can apply to learn the language, right? So I struggle on that side. But maths made perfect sense to me. For a lot of people, that like maths classes were a repetitive trauma for most of high school. And if you think about it that way, you can see why they run screaming from anything that looks like it. And if you think about the advertising, even for banking and finance, a percentage sign, right? So that's used a lot in all that advertising. A lot of people actually don't have an innate sense of what that actually is. So they know that a higher interest rate is better on cash and you get more interest, right? So they get that, and they get that a higher interest rate on a mortgage, that's bad because I'm going to pay more. But in terms of what it actually means, what compounding is, all these things that we, in the industry, we use that language as if it's a given. Honestly, most people, that's not innate to them.
You need to make it visual and representative.
Right. And in fact, I've got a very good friend of mine, and she's wonderful because she's really blunt with me about this stuff. And we were talking about interest rate. Peter, I don't get, compounding. What the hell is that? And she's just never, she said, I don't understand what you mean by that. I went, all right. So, when a TikTok gets shown and then it goes viral. So what's viral? She goes, well, one person shares and then they share it and then it's sharing it. It's just like it gets out of control. I went, that's what compounding is. Really? I mean, yeah, so a little bit of interest turns into a whole lot of interest because of year on year on year. And so she got it, right? She didn't need to know how to calculate it. She didn't need to know that 3% of 100 is 3. So I think that's the difference I'm pointing out is they don't need to, maths is actually a science. They don't need to know the science. They need some analogies to help them understand behaviours that can change. But I think we need to sort of get out of everybody's head that they've got to be able to do maths to be able to get on top of their phone.
It's not about the process you said, it's about the output, understanding what the output means and what output they want, but then the process to get there? I mean, they can use tools, they can use people that will advise them.
Correct, 100%. They can, and there are literally things they can do and take charge of that will have a massive impact. One of the things that's hard. So I will say, and maybe you can tell me the difference here internationally, but the challenge for Australians is we're a betting nation, right? So you will have noticed gambling, yeah. So it's something that's, and in fact, even to do, I mean, Anzac Day, there's going to be people, playing 2-up and things like that. Like, it's literally a part of our
gambling machine per capita is the highest in the world, actually.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So it's literally something that's within our DNA. And the struggle with that is, therefore, from a financial perspective, Australians respond better to the big one-off win than the little things that build up over time. So actually, and I'm generalizing massively here, but Australians are actually, compounding doesn't sound interesting. Well, that's a bit dull and boring. What do you mean? I've got to do it for years and over time and repeatedly? No. I want the one decision that gives me $1 million, right? So actually, we've got to sort of untrain right? So you've got to sort of untrain people of this conditioning, and it's a cultural thing here. The quick win.
And sometimes the quick win is what you win by not losing, by not gambling, for instance.
Right, definitely. But in fact,
it's not as fun to do nothing than doing something, but sometimes it works better.
Well, then, look, I would say if the unsexier the thing that you're doing for your finance, the better it will be for your finances. So if it's putting away a little amount repetitively, if it's like all those things will have a far bigger impact. I mean, people roll their because
boring is beautiful.
It is beautiful, and like food waste. It's something that I'm obsessed with, right? I love cooking. I'm a foodie. We've paid an inordinate amount of money globally at restaurants, right? So I'm happy to pay. But it drives me nuts how much food we throw away. And it's disrespectful to the animal, to the farmer, to ourselves. We pay for it and we just throw it away, right? So a lot of the things we end up starting to do with some of our coaching is teaching people how to reduce their food waste. And they're like, are you serious? You don't have some clever investing strategy or a tax structure. No. If we can get your food waste down, probably going to save you a couple of grand a year minimum. Some people will save $5,000 a year. Just changing the way we buy food.
And it's like also you're getting the habits of doing the right thing and not wasting. You apply it to food, then you're able to apply it to other foods as well.
Correct.
The impact is even bigger.
It is huge. And it is something we can control. And in the current environment of costs just through the roof, these are the sort of things that will help, and I'm not talking about, you can't have your avocado toast, or you can't go out for breakfast. I'm just saying of the food we're already buying, what if we, used it all? I mean, my husband and I are now at the point where our shopping, so our food shopping, just before we do the next shop, our fridge is bare. There is nothing left. Right, so we really have got to we do, and it requires a little bit of planning, but nothing too retentive. But it's an awareness.
Professional deformation.
But it is. And people go, oh, really? Like, is that going to make a difference? Absolutely, it will. Yeah. Absolutely.
So you're the perfect example of you're applying your science and your learnings not only to your clients but also to yourself.
Oh, we definitely are. We absolutely are, and it. What's interesting is you can really start. So people, when they're focusing on costs, will often focus on a current cost and just want to get something cheaper. So food, we go and buy our lamb direct from the butcher. We won't do that anymore. We'll go to Coles or whatever. Instead of going, well, hold on, we buy that, but in fact we cook a whole lot and then we don't use it all and then we throw out a portion. Like, so they don't, right? So they focus on the penny pinching at the individual item focus instead of the behavioural focus. And that's on all sorts of things. I mean, it's how often you get your haircuts done. It's like this behaviour stuff that we all just automatically do. Probably, look, honestly, for most people, there's 5 to 10K of savings just from a behavioural thing. And multiple things. Food savings one of them, but all sorts of things. And that's without giving up. Like, it's not you sitting at home eating ramen noodles like you did at uni and not spending any money. It's just being more aware of how you're spending money.
No, I think very interesting, and we've understood at this point that your superpower is in the habits and the having and ingraining the right habits. So maybe we can. It would be interesting to know about your approach and what you implement in your own life.
Yeah.
Both in the terms of like habits, because it has really been the key driver of this talk, but also moving on, once you've saved, to something that is pretty important for us at Upworth, which is the your personal investment philosophy. At the end, you're helping people,
Yep.
and what's your vision on it for yourself? How do you see it? So maybe can you share it a bit
Yeah,
about that?
okay. So from an investing perspective, then, and this comes back to my background, my actuarial background. So my instinct, whether I'm looking at something complicated, is to revert to analysis. I can't help that, right? It's the maths and stuff. So when I look at even investing in markets, right? So I'm going to go and I'm just going to do all the analysis. And for me, and this is not every advisor, and neither should it be. Once again, this is a
It's
methodology
personal
thing.
approach,
Is I'm a big fan of passive investing, so index investing. So I'm not talking of property. This is just for investable funds or super or things like that. I'm a fan of index investing, and the reason is that the margin you pay for active investment so rarely delivers a better outcome. Now, does it? Well, it can. There are some super smart people out there that can deliver. The challenge is almost none of them deliver every year. And the cycle goes from their number 1 to their number 40, to their number 10, to their number 60, to that. Like, there's just nowhere near the consistency in it. So,
because nobody can guess the market.
right. And they are, I could get smoked down by my colleagues here, but
That's why
so in a sense, what an active manager is doing, so they call it taking a position. When you hear that expression, right? So we're taking a position on a certain market. Let's call it we're taking a position on the European markets and what's going on in the Middle East and Russia. So what they say, what they actually mean when they say take a position is they're betting on an outcome, right? So they're saying we believe the most likely outcome is A, and they're investing according to A. Now rarely do they actually have any insight that makes that more accurate. Rarely is there. Do you mean it's not like they've got a line of Putin or something, right? Particularly when you're talking about the global stuff, like it's not like they know something the rest of us don't know in that sense. They might have more access to analysis, to be fair, so they can see trends and things. That's certainly true. But they are still making a call, right? So the challenge is they're just as likely to get that right or wrong. Now, some of them get it right more consistently. That is fair, but it's such a small proportion that for me, for my clients and for myself, how can I then pick which one of them I'd go with? Because the same problem exists. Like, well, how do I pick, right? I mean, I can meet these people and they're super bright, right? And I can see that they're applying some rigor and some analysis. They've got wonderful models. But when I look at the outcome, it's like, well, my client's going to pay this % more for that fund, but very rarely does it deliver that % more than just the index. And so for the listener, the index just being the Australian index, you're basically invested in a whole chunk of the Australian market, share market, right? So you're
taking basically like ETFs.
100% or similar. Yeah. So index funds. So now there are challenges with that. Diversification, you'll hit some holes because there's certain types of parts of business globally that don't have an index. You can't, right? So often we've got to plug those holes to make sure our clients are diversified. And that's, to me, my absolute foundational focus for investing is diversification. We don't make bets. We don't gamble our clients. We're not speculators. That's not the type of advisor I am. There are people out there who do that. And if that sounds like your thing, that's what they should look for. But for us, we don't do that. What we want to do is I want to have them invested broadly and diversified so that the money ticks along, gets a good return, and it's set and forget. And that's probably the other thing that we were talking before about mistakes people make. It's really important to understand the difference between investing and speculating. Investing is essentially an enhanced version of saving. If that's set and forget, put money away, let it grow.
Long term.
Yeah. Right. Speculating is a very lovely and technical word for gambling. Buy, sell, buy, sell, buy, sell. And they can apply science and smarts to it. There are great poker players. There are great gamblers. But we all know there's far more people that lose their money at that than win. The market's the same, unfortunately. In fact, statistically, every person that loses on the other side is somebody that's lost. Like, it's just how the market works. So yeah, I'm not a speculator. I'm I guess more conservative than that. And so we focus our energy, therefore, index funds, it's streamlined, it's efficient, doesn't cost a whole lot, and then we focus on this other stuff of just getting more money put into investing.
Yeah.
And that's worth more. I mean, it's an interesting argument, right? People, but chase returns. Well, that's great. Okay, let's talk about the difference between 5 and 20% return. That's a lot, right? That's a big difference. But if you have, a 20% return on $1, well, that's not exciting. But you could have a 5% return on $1,000. So it's the money put away to start is where the value sits. And then the earnings happen after that.
And the compounding.
Yeah. So look,
the TikTok virality.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly the virality. So for me, and I know that sounds strange because, given my background and the work I did, I could be one of those analysts in the fund managers.
Because you have the wisdom on top that prevents you from...
But also, I guess, like I was saying before, my focus is more about having enough. So I'm not chasing the best outcome. I'm chasing enough. So that's got to be good, right? It's got to be good. It can't be a rip-off. It can't be you spending too much on your investments. But I'm more focused on have you got enough? And what's the awesome adventures you're getting up to? Like, let's focus on that. Let's focus on the life you're living, and leave us to just tidy up the rest so that it's not costing you too much.
Oh, very clear. And before we go into the exciting life that we're going to live, but maybe on your classical question at Upworth is that we also ask, if you feel comfortable, but it's not about the amounts, but it's about the split, like in terms of how your portfolio looks like between different asset class, more or less, if there are any tips.
Well, look,
not tips, but any information you want to share. We're always curious about having real life, example of how people split there.
Yeah, so for like any Australian, but certainly any city-dwelling Australian, then I'm, like all of us, overweight property. Now, that's in part due to our home, but also due to, other investments. So we're massively overweight that. And it's something actually that I'm constantly focused on counteracting. So to me, other investments are really important because property is such a funny game from an investment perspective. And the reason is, so when you invest in markets, diversification is about, different companies in different industries, in different regions, you want to get as broad as you can, right? Because otherwise it's speculating, right? So investing is. Whereas in property, we pick a property in a state, a suburb, a street, and a location on that street, and we pick one. It'd be like buying a BHP share, one share for $1.2 million. Like, if I suggested that to a client, they'd be like, Peter, you're an idiot. What are you talking about? That sounds dangerous. Well, property's sort of like that, and so to me, while I understand property has that bricks and mortar, that comfort, from an investing perspective, there's a lot of risks in it because of that narrowing down of choice. So for us, then I'm consciously aware of the fact we're overweight in that sense. And then we are broadly more sort of growth focused. So we've got more hold on. No, now that I think about the big picture. Okay, so because I'm married to a good Greek guy who's also a builder, then two things for, and I'm generalizing, but two things for them is allergic to debt. So we are lucky enough not to be in debt. But secondly, cash stores are valuable. So my husband, so we do have probably more in cash than others might.
You mean like savings accounts?
Yeah. So and due to in his bit, we both have our own businesses.
Is it negotiate within your couple or your?
Correct, and which is how it all works. It's all good. But what's interesting is because of that focus on rapidly reducing debt and bringing that down to zero, the freedom that gives you. While I understand financial engineering, a lot of people would say, is that the best choice for tax? That's right.
Yeah.
I can't tell you how different your decision making is when you don't have debt. Like it just, we could, so from our trip in New Zealand, we could go, you know what, we love it here, we're going to move, and we could do it tomorrow. It's so different. And I don't mean do it because the finances, it's the mentality. There's a weight to debt that, for many people, will hold them back from all sorts of exciting futures and opportunities because that debt has real mental weight. And so for us, so I have to think, now that I think about the broader picture, we're probably a little overweight cash as well. And we've had I think we've wanted to do for years, which is buy a place down the south coast of New South Wales, south coast of Chicago, that sort of. And before COVID, we were looking, and I would have said we were ready to jump any minute. And then the crazy out of Sydney COVID prices hit, and the sort of thing we're looking at is sort of in the hills, so near the beach, but sitting back into the hills. The price has nearly doubled in some of those properties because all the silly Sydney-siders decided to move out of Sydney into the country.
Aren't you partial to Sydney-siders, by the way?
So
part of the market.
I'm one of those people, exactly. I'm part of the problem, 100%. And so we sort of, we were ready to do that, and we haven't been able to ever since. So we're one of those people sort of quietly wishing that the property market had calmed down, but we're now talking about whether that changes, but that's okay. We'll change our plans and we'll see what happens. But yeah, so it's...
it can happen even to the pros, right?
100%. Well, and look, it was a good example. It's not so much that we hesitated. It's just that the timing of what we were doing, then a silly random global event occurred. It changed the whole dynamic.
And suddenly makes sense to change your decision making based on the inputs you get from your government, right?
And because we can just go, oh, well, we'll change it. So we're now considering what that means, and whether it's still something we want to do from a lifestyle perspective. So we'll find another way to do it, or So it's been really interesting though. I mean, watching those properties was ludicrous. The prices just went through the absolute. Everybody's seen that. It's and we're lucky enough that this was going to be almost like a second place. This wasn't going to be our home necessarily. But for others that are trying to get in and it's the first property, I really feel for them.
Okay. So look, I mean, usually, one of my last question is around, the last piece of wisdom that you want to share with our audience.
Yeah.
But before that, and because you mentioned you're also a sci-fi and fantasy fan.
Yes.
So on top of your piece of wisdom, share with us your favorite, maybe sci-fi or fantasy story or book that you recommend to the audience. So we want a balance, right, between the financial recommendation and the fun recommendations, right? Really? So it seems much harder for you.
Yeah,
the decision making paralysis, right?
Exactly. Just one, no.
or two. Okay, fine.
So I love reading, but I'm now a massive.
Don't need to apologize for that.
No. So I'd recommend everybody should be going and seeing the Dune movies. And see them in IMAX. We went to the IMAX.
You're all about 3D, right?
The IMAX. So there are some scenes in the movie where, it's your typical space war sort of thing. Sort of on the slightly depressing side, I'd say to people. It's not, it's not quite as upbeat as Star Wars. There's no real humor or anything like. Maybe a little bit, but not really. But it's that epic sort of film. But the seats shake in IMAX during that. They've got the surround sound. It really is, and it was. I thought they were fabulous.
The air coming from the below as well, or
no, we didn't do that one. You know what? We So I love film generally, and particularly love sort of 80s action and adventure films. So Indiana Jones, right? And so the recent Indiana Jones came out, not so recent, but in the last little while, came out. We went, all right, we'll go. And we went to whatever the version they call it, where it has water spraying and the seat shakes. I thought, that'll be the great way to see it. Do not see movies in that version. It was horrendous. Because if you think about a typical Indiana Jones film, there's a lot of rickety moving around. So they're always bumping through places. And so your seat is doing that the whole movie.
Then you have
correct. I'm too old for this. I'm 50. Oh my gosh. So yeah, it's I would say Dune is a recent thing people definitely need to see. And if I had to pick an author, not that I've read him in a while, but David Eddings is my favourite fantasy author. And he's only got a bajillion books that he's written, but what came out years after, so he's been around a very long time, but what came out years after is he's actually always been writing them with his wife, and you can see it in the way the the characters will interact, and particularly not
there are still potential clients, but
clients, really. It's so funny, but yeah, the interactions and the just the way the characters spoke to each other, I always loved, and I love anything that's got that repartee. It's why I love Ted Lasso. right? It's the way the client, I nearly did it again, the characters. It's the way they all interact. So I love anything like that where there's a real vibe and interaction between the characters.
Okay, so maybe last question about your wisdom then this time. So what's your last piece of wisdom, last advice that you give to the clients, to your audience?
To the audience, what is my last piece of wisdom? I think what I would say is I really get people to lift their heads. And what I mean by that is all the stuff I've been talking about is all about actually living life. We call it living fierce, right? Actually living in the now and painting a picture for how you want to live in the future. And part of doing that is to stop living through other people's lives in social media. Using it as a research tool, 100%. We did that for our trip to New Zealand, right? Lots of YouTube videos, did all that stuff. But we've got to stop thinking that living is seen through this tiny little postcard size screen. Living is being here and looking up and experiencing all these great things that we do on a day-to-day basis. And once you start...
So Chaz welcoming you in our podcast.
Yeah, exactly. So it's all these things, there's so much good stuff just going on around you all the time. And most people miss it. So once you start living like that, it's being very conscious, then that will apply to your finances. It'll apply to all sorts of things. I hesitate to say this, it sounds a bit we're living with purpose, but really sort of absorbing all the things going on around you would make a huge difference to the future for you.
Stay curious, look around there, learn new things, experience new things every day.
Exactly.
Thanks again for joining us today, Peita.
You're very welcome.
To all of you who have listened to our podcast, thanks again as well to finally deciding to take control of your finances. If you want to learn more about Peita and how her team works, you can head to caboodlesfs.com.au.
Correct.
If I'm not mistaken. And of course, you can, finance your mortgage or manage all your finances in one place by creating an Upworth account on upworth.com.au. Thanks again for attending the very best finance podcast, especially today with Peita and the Upworth Talks, and I will see you soon.